What up, Pittsburgh Steel fans? Matty P, Shannon White. More content from the Steelers global perspective. Men, I'm going to get it right this time, not boys like our other content. But Shannon, we are getting deep into draft process. You're seeing all sorts of mock drafts. This week, Daniel Jeremiah did another mock draft, and he does these mock drafts based on what he's hearing. And he picked an interesting guy going to the Steelers in Fatanu out of Washington, who's projected to be a guard. I kind of was a bit surprised about that. But there are a few surprising things about who he picked and where he picked them. But, he does say take my mock drafts with a grain of salt. Anyway, that's kind of an interesting piece on its own. But as we're moving through the draft, how are you feeling about the draft? Who are the guys that are catching your eye this week? Is there a position that you think is firming up other than maybe center? We've done a lot of talk about center. In your mind that the Steelers would be silly not to go after. How are you feeling on all things draft?
Well, it's funny. It's such a deep draft in some places.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really shallow in others.
Yeah.
And so it's really going to impact. I think you're going to have a run on this position here and a run on that. And then it's like, so we had to do some mock drafts for one of my other shows.
Yeah.
And we just did a 4-round draft last night. And I gambled each time and took a tackle in the first round. Now, the guy I would love to have in a perfect world is Fuaga out of Oregon State. But he will be gone before 20. I think he is the classic right tackle. He's a mauler. He's a beast. And I really like him, but he'll be gone.
Yeah.
So it usually comes down to what was available. And tackle was either Mims or Guyton.
I do like Guyton. Guyton's really growing on me.
But I took Mims.
Yeah, that's fair.
Just from his sheer size, athletic profile, and youth. I said, this kid could be a right tackle for a good while. And you pair him back with Broderick Jones.
And Darnell Washington. And then in the second round, I'd hold my breath. And a couple of times, Frazier's gone. Zach Frazier. Well, I would say I've done a lot of mock drafts on different platforms this week, and Zach Frazier does not survive till 51. And then you have to overdraft for Cedric Van Pran.
Yeah. Well, I actually think Cedric Van Pran, I'd be fine with him at 51. My thing is they got to get
But that's not BPA.
They got to get Jackson Powers, Johnson, Zach Frazier, or Van Pran in the first 2 rounds. They have to.
Well, and that's why I think it's interesting because there is a lot of talk about Jackson Powers, Johnson going to places like Jacksonville. A lot of people might not be aware, but also Corey Linsley, the center from the Chargers, they've started doing void years on his contract. He has a heart issue, and it's likely that he will retire, right? So suddenly the Chargers...
I didn't hear that, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty fresh off the press. So he hasn't made the declaration. He had the heart issue, and then they talked about him having to medically retire, and they've done the stuff from a financial perspective. I think by the time this goes out, they might even have made the announcement, right? But that puts the Chargers in a position where they're picking, I think they pick 8 off the top of my head. They could trade back like 5, 6, 7 spots. But, I mean, they're up for Latham, right? So if Latham's available, then they've got Latham and Slater. So there's a lot of different scenarios that can play out. But basically, it'll be very hard for Jackson Powers Johnson to hit 20 if you go off a lot of what some of the trending information is. So I kind of sit there at the moment, and I'm like, I'm always going to advocate for trading back. You know me, like I have for a long time. That's my belief. If you look at if you're an analytics person and you're a numbers person, trading back is like 99 times out of 100 will end up in your favor over the full course of the draft. But I'm kind of like, do you trade back to 27 around the Bills? Do you trade back to 32 around the Chiefs? Get 3 picks for 1, and you just get Zach Frazier at the end of the first round. He's on, and you think about it from a center who we trust anyway. We trust our evaluation. 5-year deal. This will work out, right?
Yeah.
I kind of wonder if that's the move they need to make. If Jackson Powers Johnson's not on the board, right? That's like that's how I'm seeing it right now. Because he will not be there at 51, and then you're having to trade capital. This is the thing. If you wait till the second round to move up, you're giving away picks to move up. not gaining picks to move back, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I agree. We've talked about this for years.
Yeah.
And it frustrated us so much, but Colbert just did not have that kind of mindset or flexibility. He didn't have those connections in the league to make it happen. Well, we know that Kahn and Weidel do. And I'm so happy that we have Weidel. As I've said, I want him to sign him as co-GM, pay whatever, keep this team together because I have faith in them. And Weidel he loves the big boys. And in a year that the Steelers need 2, what a great time to have him. And honestly, a defensive tackle or a nose guard. Again, it's great to have him.
Well, and that's why it helps as well if you trade back, because if you get that extra second pick, or if you get that third pick, because Kansas at 64, as if you would not take 32, 64 and a late round pick or a future pick for pick 20. I'm taking that every day of the week. The one that I keep taking a lot is who else is picking at like 27 or 29? I have to pull up the order, but I get offered it all the time. And you end up with 3 picks, and it's like, in the first, second, and a fourth, and it's just like a pick in like the 100 mark or the 140 mark, and it just makes such a big difference to who you can draft and how you can draft.
Exactly.
Like, I don't like. And the thing is, we've got so many needs. We can't afford to keep the number of picks we have. And we've got the big gap between, what is it? We don't have the 5th. We don't have the 5th. We've got the 6th. Yeah, because we've got 194. Yeah, so we don't have the 5th pick, but we got 2 4s. So, like, that comes into play as well. Like, but I really do fear the gap between 20 and 51 and not having Frazier or Jackson Powers-Johnson on the board. And that worries me.
Oh, yeah. Like I said, I'm one of them guys bad. Now, Frazier, just due to the fact of everything I know about him, I just did a draft evaluation for our big board about him because I'm his hype man and everybody knows it. But I just think he's the perfect Steeler. But I try not to get too caught up on one player because you always end up disappointed. Creed Humphrey. But now, still looking for a center this many years later. But I like Jackson Powers-Johnson and I like Van Braun. They on our site, we had Andrew and Kevin Smith did a breakdown and a profile on Van Braun. And, Andrew thinks he don't know why he's not a first round guy. And
I can see that. I can see that argument.
I have the other guys ahead of him. The reason being is a lot of people don't understand center. Now, here I'm going to get off talking about centers again. But it's kind of who I am. That linebackers, you just might as well expect it. But playing center is more than just physicality and strength. There's the intelligence factor.
Yeah.
The adaptability factor, communication, leadership, alpha, durability. There's so many things that go in to the center position for a guy who he also touches the ball every play.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people don't realize that.
Yeah.
But the snapping, we've seen how much struggles the Steelers have had just
the core part of playing center.
Exactly.
Many centers seem to struggle with.
And so that's why I think that Frazier's the consummate Steeler, and I'd love to see it happen. But this year you do have those big 3. Then you have a real step down. And they really need to address this now and moving forward because, it's part of the rebuild.
Yeah.
But then you get into that 3rd round, and then do you look? I mean, I'm really wanting to find a middle linebacker.
Well, I wanted to talk about middle linebackers.
Yeah. But also, they need a defensive tackle. Bad. Those 2 positions. Because everybody said, well, what about cornerback? You've been screaming about cornerback. That's why I want to take care of cornerback in free agency.
I completely agree. And I think there's some late corners as well. I actually think
developmental. Yes.
I want to talk about some linebackers in a second, but also the linebackers wait to talk about Max. There's a name that I need you to write down. I need you to try and find some analysis on this guy. He's the center out of Oklahoma, Andrew Raym, right? Raym.
Raym. Okay.
Yeah. Now, I haven't seen a bone of tape, a minute of tape, a second of tape, but I've read his draft profile, and I was like, how the freak is this guy ranked 200 outside the 200 on Pro Football Network right now? I'm going to go find a little bit about the guy over the coming weeks, but I'm not the deepest O-line guru and what have you. But I'd like you to have a look at him because he's someone like Matt Lee's ranked below him, for example. But like there's some mock drafts that I do, and I'm like, I'm doubling up at center. I'm going to get someone late because it's such a problem position for the Steelers, right?
Yeah.
So I think the other thing I wanted to say about Van Pran is interesting because you could go Mims in the first round, and then you go Van Pran, and then we've got 3 guys from the Georgia Bulldogs O-line.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like, who all have the chemistry
A
with
national
each other.
championship offensive line, I might add. So
That's what I said. Yeah. That's what I said. So, like that, there's nothing wrong with that. Going to linebacker, I'm seeing Cooper out of Texas A&M drop way down the lists. I'm also seeing a lot of.
But I mean, to me, on all the mocks, he's the first guy off the board.
I got Trotter in the 3rd round the other week at like 80. The Steelers pick at 84. Is it 84? 81.
84.
84. Yeah. So that was kind of wild. But I'm also hearing like that James Williams is very much firming up as a linebacker. Like he's been pushed there, right? And we're going to see it out of the combine. We'll know after the combine where he's sitting. Like James Williams is obviously, for listeners out there, the strong safety that I'm really high on out of Miami. I think he should be a strong safety. But even if he's listed out linebacker, then the Steelers can pick him and choose what the heck they want to do with him, whether he's a box safety and then he's a linebacker on certain, schematic coverages, etc. But like, he's going to go in the first 3 rounds. Would you take that punt on a guy who's 6'5" and like over 225 pound? Would you take based on what we see on the paper in front of us right now? Would you be open to them doing something creative like that? Because I mean, at the end of the day, we're going to have E-Rob, Holcomb, or they're probably bringing back Quan and what have you.
I keep hearing that. But Quan tore his left, I think, Achilles, and now he's tore his right Achilles. Now, for a position that requires explosiveness, change of direction, that's crippling. I mean, there's no guarantee he will ever get back the mobility that he had.
Sure.
So I'm not counting on Quan. I love Quan. We'll see what happens. I know they've come a long way. They can do so much now that they used to with rehabilitation, and guys come back from stuff that used to was career ending. But that scares me. So now I'm looking at Holcomb's knee was mangled. It was awful.
Yeah.
So you got a Landon Roberts, you got Mark Robertson. That's it.
Yeah.
I think
they'll bring back Jack. I think they'll bring back Jack.
I don't want Miles Jack.
I know, but I'm just saying that's what I think they'll do.
If he's healthy for 4 games, he can play good.
But that's what I think they'll do. They'll bring him into that role. He don't. Like the 5th.
You can't play him too long.
No,
because
but you could play him the first 3 or 4 weeks by Holcomb. It keeps his recovery going.
Well, that would work. As long as he's progressing, and it looks like Holcomb's going to make it back, and because that was a nasty, nasty injury. But I think that now's the time. See, that's the trading back part. Why I love the idea. Yep. Because there's so many holes.
Yep.
And there's not enough draft capital. But if you trade back, then you can take a guy and get that young stud, whether it's a Cooper, a Willis, Trotter, whoever, and get them in there, because the Steelers are. They won't start them right off the bat. They'll be sitting on the bench first 4 or 5 games.
Yep.
Until everybody realizes, he's the best guy we got. So they have to find that young alpha, because every great Steeler defense has had that guy in the middle.
Junior Colson.
Well, he was my 3rd rounder on our mock yesterday.
And he's rising. He is rising.
No, not 3rd. I'm sorry. I took Fisk in the 3rd.
Oh, good man. Fisk
I
is
took
my
Fisk.
favorite.
And then
Fisk is my favorite defensive tackle.
Yes, in the fourth, I took Colson. Let me tell you why I took Fisk. I know you like him. And as I watched him, I kept having these flashbacks to Aaron Smith and to Brett Kiesel and to guys who they played a certain way. They wasn't flashy. They were just power dirt eaters, man. Just clog up everything. Offenses hate these guys because they screw up all their plans because you can't manhandle them. You can't just move them out of the way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So Fisk has really grown on me. In that I think he's a safe pick that I think could come in like Benton last year and play immediately.
That's the thing. I think he's what I would call NFL ready.
Yeah, I think
that's what I love about him. He's NFL ready. And I think, yeah, I like for a big bloke. I also feel like there's like a snappiness and power to what he does. I don't know. There's just something that when I see him,
see Smith. I see
Kiesel. I see closer to Kiesel than Smith, but
yeah, but he's heavier than Kiesel.
I know.
And Kiesel was at first all athlete. I mean, he played special teams. Kiesel that's where he made his mark. But then eventually he got stronger and bigger. Fisk is a man already.
Well, that's the thing that I like. Especially, he was ready. Like, he did the smart thing. He sat back another year, went to a better program or more high profile program, and I think that's done wonders for him. He and I just love the constant production out of him. I think that's absolutely huge.
But he was very consistent. He was so consistent.
Yes.
If you watched his film, one game. Like a lot of times you'll see a guy and he'll flash in this game. And he's awesome.
Yeah.
And then you watch another game and he's invisible. Not Fisk. He's the same every game. And maybe that's why I think Aaron Smith. But
that's
because he's always consistent.
See, this is going to sound outlandish to people. They actually run the same reported 40 time though. I feel like he's a Vita Vea light. I just do. I just think like the anchor in the middle. I just think like he's just, it's a very, very high comparison to put him in. But I'm not saying
mobile to me.
Yeah, that's the crazy part.
He's got that anchor, but he appears more mobile. Yeah,
and you just sort of think, again, it starts to get into a lot of the top of my capacity. But I just think about like the stunts you can do, the angles you can put him at into the interior of an O-line, like. There's some guys that are big and they don't play to their size, right? Yeah. At times, even in my own football career, a couple of my mates say, sometimes you don't fully play to your size, right? It used to frustrate me, but and it was really important feedback. But with Fisk, I feel like every kilogram or pound that the guy's carrying is being put to work every time he hits the O-line. Yeah. I love it.
And the Steelers need that physicality.
100%.
I mean, somebody was talking about, well, bring back, I kind of did a defensive tackle article this week, and I'm like, you didn't mention Martravius Adams. One, he's a free agent. Two, I really don't want him back because he's a quick twitch 4-3 guy. He's more of a penetrator. He doesn't fit the 3-4. Leal was a mistake. Leal, this year they got to let him come in at 300 to 315 and see what he can do at his natural position because he's not an edge. So they can't quit. They got to stop trying to use him in two different ways.
I almost think they got to get him to drop.
I don't think he's
270, and then
I don't think he has the explosiveness, even if he dropped 15 pounds, to stay on the edge. I think it's either he's going to be a tackle or an end, or he's not playing. He could do something for a 4-3. I just don't see him with the Steelers. So really you got Ogunjobi, who didn't really live up to the contract. If his quickness allows him to penetrate and cause havoc early in the game, he'll have a strong game. If he's invisible in the first quarter, he's invisible in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, that's
a problem.
Yeah.
You got Hayward, who's coming off of 2 groin surgeries.
Yeah.
And a major core surgery that cost him half a season. He's only getting older. I don't like relying on that. Hopefully he can come back. I know he'll put the work in, but the body is what it is.
Yeah.
Benton is the key piece, but Benton does not need to be at nose tackle. You're wasting him at nose tackle.
Yeah.
So that's why you get a guy like Fisk. That's why you get the big boy. That, and as a rookie, Fisk can move out too later. There's a lot of things they can do. If they switch to a 4-3,
well,
him
so
and
here's
Benton
a name.
in the middle would be nasty.
So there's 2 names later in the draft that I have been looking at a little bit. And one is Mason with the double A Smith out of LSU. Which
I've been doing some research on him.
You have?
Yeah.
What do you think of him? Because when you read his draft profile, it's like, why is this guy why is he this far back in the draft?
Great length, good quickness, bad senior year.
Yeah.
He really hurt himself. I don't know what happened. You looking at his highlights the year prior, he looked explosive, powerful, and real relentless. And then last year, he did a lot of dancing. He didn't disengage well at all last year. And for a guy at 6'6" with them long arms, he's got to be able to disengage and keep blockers off him. But I don't think he did a good job last year.
So I was traveling a couple of days ago for work, and I was listening on the plane to an audio book that I started to listen to. I started listening to a couple of chapters, take a break, go back, listen to a few chapters. Yeah. And it's called Scout Speak by Neil Stratton, who had a long career in the NFL and scouting, GM roles and that sort of stuff. And he literally talked about, he got a task for an intern a couple of years back where he set them a challenge of looking at where they were drafted, how they performed, and what their last 2 years of college were like. Because he talked about guys that rise up and down the boards. And one of the things he said was that the second year, their penultimate year of their college football career, actually is a better, in some cases, particularly in the first rounds, can be a better indication of what they will do in the pros. Really kind of funny, right? So when you tell me that with Mason Smith, I'm like, well, if we're dealing with, technique issue, there's guys that have changed around him, and
they had a lot of change around him.
Yeah, that's what
they did have a lot of change. Yeah.
So if you think about that, you're like, well, hang on, 4th round or later, that's a really interesting proposition. But the other guy that is going to rocket on people's attention, so I'm going to say it now, I almost did it last week, is Evan Anderson, the defensive tackle out of FAU. He went to the East-West Shrine Bowl. Bucky Brooks talked about him after that, saying there's big hype on this kid. They're like, if he went to a different school, he'd be talking top 2 rounds. That kid is going to jump up the boards. And then it might be one of those things where you see these players jump up combine and pro day and then slide back down a little bit, but then end up moving their stock from the 6th round to the top of the 4th or the back of the 3rd. But he's another guy that could well be in the mix, for a lot of teams come draft day, Evan Anderson. So
see, now I have to look at him. I haven't got to look at him yet. Today I was trying to check out, find a guy that last night Big G was talking that Michigan had a nose guard. Munster. This guy is huge. He's 6'4" and 370, 360, 370. And Big G took him in the 4th round in his mock. And I said, I'm not even familiar with him. I watched Michigan. I watched him win the championship, and I don't remember him. I guess he's just so big, he just tied up blockers.
Well, I mean, I'd love to see Trevonde Sweat out of Texas, but you're
he's
probably going to have to
now I
spend
watched
a
him.
second round.
He's huge.
Mate.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, like he just eats people for lunch.
You ain't moving him. I mean, it was funny. It was just like, at times he was just like holding the guy and just watching what was happening with the play. He wasn't even putting a strain. He was just like, I mean, that kid is strong and he is huge.
I kind of want him to rock up to the I want him to rock up to the draft night for the first round, just so I can see the comparison to him to humans. Because who's that bloke out of Georgia that the Eagles took? Not Carter, they took him.
Oh, Jordan Davis.
Jordan Davis. I think it's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like Trevonde Sweat is a massive dude.
Massive guy.
Massive
exactly.
dude.
Now, one guy you mentioned earlier, Colson.
Yeah.
Like I said, I took him in the mock. You mentioned Williams. I'm trying to keep this together. James Williams. Because if you move Williams to linebacker, to me, you got Dorian Williams from last year that I like.
Yeah.
You're going to have a really good cover guy.
Yeah.
And we see what Dorian Williams did for Buffalo this year.
Yeah.
I would like to have that in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And they could really use it. So, again,
I'm mocking two linebackers pretty regularly now. Because
you asked me, how did I feel about that? See, that's outside the box thinking, like we talked about last week. And you get a guy that talented, you'll figure out where to use him. Does he need to be the free safety, or does he need to be that off-ball linebacker? Either way, he's a ball player.
Well, Jalen Ford from Texas, not that this needs to be the Longhorn show, even though, yes, I do love the Longhorns as well. Jalen Ford's slipping way down lists as well, right? Just because I think other guys are rising. I don't think it's that he's a worse prospect. So you could go Colson in the third, or even I think Colson's in the third round. I think he's ahead of a few guys now. Like, I've seen him picked ahead of Trotter a lot. But, like, I would have thought you can get Ford in the fourth, and you've got 2 fourth-round picks as well. So that's what's going to be interesting for the Steelers. You know the position, though, that's super not deep for the Steelers, that's going to be a problem for the Steelers? His wide receiver is good at the top. There's some real cream at the top. But I don't like a lot of what's in the mid-rounds, and particularly what's late. So Steel fans out there that are thinking we're going to do something at wide receiver, if they're not going to pick at 51 a wide receiver, after that, like,
that's what I was problem I was having in the mock draft.
Yeah,
I wanted to wait to the 4th round.
Can't.
But all the guys I liked are gone.
Yep.
And then I ended up taking Malik Washington out of Virginia.
Yeah, I'm not
but
sold on that.
The problem is I can see where you could use him as a slot guy, but you already got Calvin Austin.
Yeah.
And he's not big enough to be a good blocker. And so, see, my plan. I want cornerback in free agency. That's your big splash expenditure. Then I want wide receiver.
Yep.
In free agency, like a guy like Jennings or a guy like Chalk or some big body guy who can block and give them what they need. Because Deontay Johnson is not the answer. Not in Arthur Smith's offense. Yep. So you trade Johnson for a second or a third. You trade back, pick up extra pick. Then in the first 3 rounds, you could address these guys. Because we talked about Corley. We've talked about other guys. I like Wilson.
I like Wilson too.
I think Wilson is an outside receiver, but I think he's very much like Antonio Brown in ways.
But I think I think an outside receiver wouldn't be the worst, because I would like to see Pickens play a little bit of slot.
I don't know, man. Pickens, it's funny. Pickens, when he wants to block, that dude can block. But he does not like guys pressing him.
But it's shifting. If you shift him in the I'm just thinking, like, if you get
I'm just thinking in the slot, you might have some guys get real physical with him, and I don't know if he's going to like it.
I don't know. Bring out the competitor in him. I just think if you're hitting, that game against the Bengals where Kenny Pickett's hitting Pat Freiermuth and Pat Freiermuth's just going down the middle.
Yeah.
Then you motion and you bring, even if it's off a wide receiver, what ends up being a wide receiver screen from someone else, like a chalk, right?
Yeah.
And Pickens comes around and goes through the middle. I just think every time Pickens gets into the middle or he steps into the middle where he comes out and in the middle of the field, he just makes guys look silly. Like obviously at the second, kind of more between the second and the third level, right? Like yes, I worry about him going up against some linebackers, but like I just think that guy's got to be all over the field. He has got to, and the more that you put on early in the season on tape of him everywhere, you make scheming for the Steelers offense defensively a lot harder, right? And I just think the guy's a weapon. They need to find ways to give him touches. That's what it's got to be about. How do we get George Pickens 10 to 15 touches a game? That's what it's got to be. That's how you got to treat him.
We had talked towards the end of last year. I don't know if it was the Seattle. No, I think it wasn't Seattle. It was the Ravens game. He got 0 targets.
Yeah.
Now that cannot happen, and that showed you the limitations of Canada's playbook.
Correct.
Now with Arthur Smith, if you got to put him in the backfield to start the play, you put him in the slot, switch sides, whatever you got to do, put him in motion, make it harder where they can't double team him. Remember how they used to have to do AB? AB was all over the field but he still got targets.
Yeah.
Now it helped Juju. He feasted, but still, that made AB. That only increased his value and his impact every game. They have to do that with George Pickens. Yeah. He has to be a threat on every play.
Especially if you are going to move Deontay. Because if you're going to move Deontay, like whoever you bring in, if you're putting a lot of onus on Pickens, you've got to do something to make it easier on him.
But if you have quality other receivers, which the Steelers didn't have last year.
But I don't know. I don't see the path there.
And you have somebody who can scheme somebody open.
Yeah.
Then you don't have to have Deontay Johnson who could get open in 2 seconds.
But my problem is that I don't think with the caliber of blokes they can get at other positions, wide receiver is very hard to get. Wide receiver almost doesn't make sense after 20, right? I'm going to sit here and say this right now. Some Steel fans might throw their phone or whack their computer when I say this. If there's a decent wide receiver, one of the top 4 guys on the board at 20, with how expensive that position is on a 5-year deal, effectively, because you can use the tag, I'm not going to sit here analytics-wise, and as a man that likes his numbers, money-wise, I'm not going to hate it. I'm just not. Like, I can't, because it makes a lot of there's too many arguments for it. But I don't think they should do it. It's not what I recommend. I don't want them to do it. But my problem is going to be that in free agency, apart from DJ Chalk and apart from a couple of other guys, the Steelers, it's a bit like the quarterback situation in many ways. There's not a great solution here. There's really not. They're in a very tight bind when it comes to wide receiver.
Oh, it's well, that's why the value for wide receivers is so high now in the cost, because finding proven guys that can actually go to different schemes and still be productive, that drives the cost up. And then you got Arthur Smith's system, which isn't a great fit for everybody. Everybody still thinks I want to get rid of Deontay because I don't like the way he runs sideways and backwards, and he don't want to block, and he offers nothing as far as jack yards. He really doesn't. But that's not the real reason now. Now try to get value out of him because it's the last year of his contract. He isn't a physical receiver. He isn't a good fit for Arthur Smith's offense. He has more value elsewhere. Move him and get the draft picks, and then get you a second-round wide receiver.
There is a guy that, some people are like, nah, he's done in the NFL. There is a guy that I think the Steelers would be silly not to have a look at in the Arthur Smith offense, right? Is Laviska Shenault, because that guy with that size, that speed athletically, he is worth, and I'm talking minimum. I'm talking vet minimum, incentivized bonus. Put him in there like that. I'd much rather them to just draft them, Corley and the Malachi Corley at 51, right? But
we've heard Chenault's name for the last 3 years?
Yeah.
I mean, because just sitting back.
But he's like Cordell Patterson. He's a guy that you could play at linebacker and you can get him to do wide receiver things.
Well, you got
not
Curtis
a linebacker,
Samuel,
running back.
You got Curtis Samuel, who's the guy that.
But he's gonna want more. But he's gonna get more money than I think this
you still think
role
he will?
deserves. I don't think he'll get like over 12. But I think like Laviska Shenault you can bring in for like under $3 million, right?
Yeah,
I don't think you're bringing in Curtis Samuel at like $3 million.
See, to me, Samuel is like an $8 million guy.
Yeah, but I don't want him to spend.
I don't see him over that
because I want Shenault and DJ Chalk. Like I think they need an option. Like we saw it with Allen Robinson last year. We had so much money in the cap tied up to one guy, and he couldn't do it. We were stuffed, right?
That was a mistake.
If you move Deontay, we're -1 wide receiver, so we need 2 at least. That's why I'm just. And then you can take a punt on a guy late in the draft, right?
Yeah.
But like, I just worry a little bit about that position because there's not a lot of guys there. If Kenny Pickett approved he was the guy, I'd be like, man, try and do something for Calvin Ridley, right? But like it's not worth investing in that because we're going to be a run first deep offense anyway. So there's not a lot out there, and this is the problem. Like, and that if this was a Colbert draft, it would worry the heck out of me because I think he would overdraft someone at 51.
He would go early, yes, he would.
Right? And again, it's why you trade back, because if you trade back in the first and you get an extra second, then you can get a Malachi Corley, for example, because you can play around. You can get a second and a fourth, or you can get a Roman Wilson or one of those guys. There'll be a decent wide receiver that does fall into the third, but it's going to be very like 50-50 on what happens. Like, the other guy that, everyone was so high on and now they're out on him, before we quickly wrap it up, is like Tez Walker out of, North Carolina. Like, everyone thought he was the goods.
Yep.
Didn't have a great combine. He's going to have a really good pro day and a really good really good combine, really good pro day. Was not in the best offense, last year in terms of, overall what they achieved, because there's questions about Drake May. So it's a very interesting situation. So, like, I just, when it comes to draft,
other guy, Leggett?
Oh, I like him.
Yeah.
So I like him, but
now he's moving up into the fourth now.
You got to get him the ball though, and I don't know how much we're going to get him the ball.
Well, I mean, the one thing about Arthur Smith's offense is when you tried to take away Derrick Henry, they destroyed you with A.J. Brown and I can't remember who the other guy was. And then, now he's got the tight ends too. So I think that the passing will be efficient. But I wonder about, who's going to have a massive amount of targets, because I think Farmer's going to get his targets in that offense.
Well, that's what I was going to say. That's why I think it's smarter in the fourth, if you haven't picked wide receiver, to pick Theo Johnson out of Penn State. Double up on your Penn State tight ends. Theo Johnson has about 75% of the overall production in terms of yards and touchdowns that Pat Freiermuth had. But you lessen the load on Pat then, because to me, Darnell Washington, I'm not saying he can't be. I think he could be from what I've seen, but in college. But Darnell Washington doesn't catch the ball at the moment, right? So we need another pass-catching tight end that can block well enough. And I think Theo Johnson right now is literally ranked 119, for example, on Pro Football Network's mock draft. The Steelers have pick 119. So I'm like, and 120, right? So you get your choice of the two at that point.
I thought it was 120 and 121.
I don't know, 119.
It's what the Steelers had, I thought.
Every mock draft I do is 119.
It might be. I might be off, but I don't know why I thought it was 120, 121.
But regardless, like that's there. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting. to see how it falls. Anything else draft related that you wanted to talk about before we wrap it up?
No, I'm like I said, there's some guys I'm just getting into now and studying, and then there's other guys I haven't got to yet. I'm going to look up the guys you mentioned. And
I still need your opinion on Tyrese Knight out of University of Texas, El Paso. I still want to get your opinion on that guy.
Yeah, I meant to look him. I have not done it yet.
That's right. That's right. We got there. We got some time. We got some
Yep,
time. So, yeah, you're starting to hear me come up with, those names. I start coming out with those outsider names as we get rolling.
Well, I know that in the past, you've given me names and Andrew Wilbar, and he'd be like, you got to check out this guy. And I'm like, okay, I'll take a look at him. And then I'm like, this is later round guys. And sure enough, he's got a really good, probably 50-50 track record. They either don't make anything, or they end up being a quality NFL guy. So that's what I like. I like those sleeper guys.
Yeah. I think you watch Evan Anderson go from no one knowing who the bloke is to being like, you watch. There'll be people that'll be mocking him higher than Fisk, and you'll be sitting there shaking your head, but you'll be secretly smiling because you'll be like, can we get Fisk in the fourth?
Mm-hmm.
But I think Fisk is going to blow people away at the combine. I think he's going to be like, I think it's going to be.
He just great. Is a football player. And those guys have a way of impressing, as you say, at the combine and pro days.
That's it. Well, that's going to wrap up all our Steelers Global Perspective content for this week. I'm Matty P with Shannon White, as always. Go Steelers.